This is Will Tchakirides interviewing Dr. Rhonda Muhammad for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. It is 1:09 p.m. on November 14th, 2024. This interview is being recorded in Raleigh, North Carolina. We're at the Earfluence Studios downtown. All right, Dr. Muhammad, I'm just going to have you state your name in full for the record, and then I want to know when and where you were born.
Okay, my full name is Rhonda Khadijah Muhammad. I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, to some very conscious parents, Margaret and Kenneth Murray.
And would you tell me a little bit about your parents' life, where they come from, and what they did for work?
Well, I was born in Baltimore, and we moved here to North Carolina in 1960. My parents were, the work that they did, they were entrepreneurs who believed in self-sufficiency. They were very conscious about the climate in the country at that time. And so they were intentional about making a difference and being a part of something that would make a difference for people who were underserved and who were subjugated. And so I grew up in an environment of a father who was not only conscious nationally, but was conscious internationally. And so we learned, and I heard as a young person, as a young child, discussions about African colonization. I was privy to discussions about African Americans or black people and not just our sojourn here to America, but our collective, how do I want to say this? Our collective efforts to mitigate oppression. And so that's the environment that I grew up in. Mm-hmm.
Now, were they educators?
No, they weren't. My mother attended some college, and my father did not. And so they weren't educators by the classical sense of education, but they were social activists. And so for me, that was my formation as a person, and they advocated education very much. And so when we moved here to North Carolina, my father came first, and then we followed. And I think I was in the 4th grade when we moved here. And so when we moved to Durham, North Carolina first. And again, that entrepreneurial spirit was something that was inculcated very early in life. And so they established businesses. My mother did income taxes. My father was a construction person, and so he learned from his father how to do sheetrock and stucco and those kinds of things. And so he brought those skills with him, and he would find work when we moved here based on that skill set.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember about Baltimore as a young person?
I remember Baltimore as a very vibrant place. I was born in the early 50s, and so my father was also a jazz musician, and so we had a lot of cultural expression in the home. Baltimore, Daddy would talk about growing up. He grew up in the neighborhood where Thurgood Marshall grew up, so he was aware of people like him. He would talk about Sammy Davis Jr. So we were very culturally in tune with the tenor of the times. And so with that said, there is this cultural bent that we have. My mother went to Morgan State for a few years before she had me. And so we come from a family of educators. Her brothers and sisters were educated. And so, you know, we came from, I don't like the word poor because poor is not a good description. We were rich in our history. Baltimore is a very rich place and culturally. And when I think about it, I have good, fond memories. Even though I left in the early 60s, I still have good, fond memories. And plus, our family is still there. And so on both sides, on my mother's side and my father's side. Mm-hmm.
Would you return back to Baltimore pretty frequently to visit
yes.
family?
Oh, definitely, definitely. My mom would go back. My parents would go back at least 4 to 5 times a year. And so, yes, we kept in close contact with our family. Mm-hmm.
And you said your father was a musician. What instruments did he play?
He played the guitar. Mm-hmm. And, wow, now you're spawning out to something else. And one of his dear friends, childhood friends, was, people know him as Brother Youssef. He was a jazz musician as well. He was a piano player. And so he and my father had what they called the Ken Murray Sextet. And if this was before I was born, this must have been in the mid to late 40s. And so they played gigs in Baltimore City. And they were very well known. And so when I think about my childhood, I think about musicians coming to the house. I think about, and even though I can't remember them, that was just a richness that made me feel good about being in that environment. Yeah.
And in addition to hearing live music in the house, mm-hmm. was the radio on in the house growing up?
Oh, definitely. It was definitely on here in North Carolina. I don't remember as much in Baltimore about the radio, but I do know it was definitely on here in North Carolina. And having a consciousness of our history and our identity, we always... I remember us traveling, and my parents would always try to find a station that they could tell had some black influence. And so, yeah. And then after we came to North Carolina, then definitely, because even before college radio, there were black radio stations that we listened to.
Do you recall any of those in North Carolina?
The one that now you're gonna make me the one that I remember before WSHA. If I can, it'll come to me. But it was a radio station, WLLE radio station, and my mother, as time progressed, I think as early as the 70s, my mother started speaking on WLLE. But there were other radio personalities before then. But I remember her I don't know, if I'm not mistaken, that will have to be verified. But if I'm not mistaken, it was in the 1970s.
What did you notice that was, even as a kid, what did you notice was different about North Carolina versus Baltimore, the upper South, the Mason-Dixon line, right? What was different about coming down to North Carolina?
It's interesting that you say that, because I really, as a child, did not want to move here. I felt that we would come into a rural area. I remember saying to my parents, why do we have to go where the streets are not paved and they don't have street lights? And so coming from right there at the Mason-Dixon line and coming here, as a child, I did not want to move here. But hindsight is always 20/20, and it is the best decision that I feel could have been made. As a mother, a grandmother, it is was a rich environment for us to live in here, growing up, and then raising my children, and now seeing my grandchildren. So yes.
Going back to your parents as social activists, do you recall any specific campaigns in your youth that they were engaged in? Organizations maybe as well?
One of the things that, my parents were Muslim, African-American Muslim, and so they were very much about the business of establishing economics, and as I said, they were entrepreneurs, and so in that establishment of economics, they believed in the collective efforts of putting things together. So they were very instrumental in, when we first moved, we moved to Durham, and we stayed in Durham for about a year or so, but they were very interested in the climate at that time. This is the 1960s. And the climate at that time was working for the uplift of African American, of people of color. And so that's what they were very much interested in. One of the things that I found so interesting is the fact that the movie, the movie that was put out, Best of Enemies, with Taraji Henson, and the portrayal of a Ku Klux Klansman who, over a course of time, she and that person were able to work through their theoretical differences. It's just interesting that the book actually mentions my father's name in it as one that was participating in some of the, how do I explain it? When there were demonstrations that were going on, the men within our Muslim community would show up for protection for some of the demonstrators. And it was just interesting to see his name mentioned. I said, wow, this is something I didn't even know about that much. And so when you talk about organizations, as a young person, we were very much a part of organizing and unifying to be able to impact and make a difference. And so we established schools. My parents were very instrumental in establishing businesses. We were on the main street in Durham on Chapel Hill Road, and so we had fish markets, we had a restaurant, we had bakeries, and so they were in the forefront of establishing an economic base within our community. And interesting enough, when I went to college, I met people who I did not know per se, because by the time I went to college, we were living in Raleigh, but there were people that I met at in school that actually said to me, we used to eat at the Shabazz restaurant, or we admired the work that you all did. So it's just, those are some of the kinds of things that are that help you to know that the work that was done was not only it's just not just appreciated, but it impacted people in different ways.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm. You know, you're talking about economic self-sufficiency, mm-hmm. cultural self-determination, mm-hmm. Black self-defense. Mm-hmm. What else do we need to understand about the ethic of Black Muslims, the folks in your family, the community that you are engaged with? Because I don't feel like in American society we broadly, conventionally, have a full understanding of the significance of this movement and this community of people.
Well, one of the things that, and Malcolm X said it very eloquently. He was questioned. What do Black people want? We want the same thing that everybody else wants. And so not handed to us on a platter, but earned and respected as human beings who have aspirations. And so within that confine, or within that construct that I lived, I really got to appreciate some of the icons of the movement because they stayed with my family when they came south. And so even though the media portrayed them in one light, when you are up close and personal to people, you see their humanity. And so for me, I realized that there's a public side to people, but there's also a private side that identifies their humanity in their wants, their desires, their hurts, their feelings of, how can I say it? Feelings of anxiety, feelings of wanting to really make a difference. So for me, growing up in that environment, it promoted self-efficacy. I'll just be straight up with you. It promoted a sense of self-efficacy in that you appreciate, you come to honor and identify what you and who you are as a person. And then we have a term in education, hegemony. You come to look at what is the hegemony that you've been fed? What is the knowledge, as we say, that comes across, and whose knowledge is worth knowing? And so once you accept, once you learn, once it resonates with your inner being and your soul, then you begin to realize, wow, I do have efficacy. I do have agency.
Yeah, there are power dynamics in the narratives that we're taught, right? Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you recognized that in part because of the community you grew up in, the family you grew up in. It nurtured that sense of self, that sense of identity.
I'm going to tell you a story about Muhammad Ali that I remember. He came, well, Malcolm stayed with us in 1963, but Muhammad Ali, how old was I in 63? I was 13, I think, 12 or 13 when Brother Malcolm came. And he stayed a few days. He was on a speaking circuit, and my father was a minister here in the South. And so Daddy's responsibility was to get him on the college campus to speak. And so he went to Duke. Duke would not allow him to speak. He went to UNC in Chapel Hill. They would not allow him to speak. He went to North Carolina Central, and they would not allow him to speak. He was too volatile as a person in the media. And so my father had a lot of wit and common sense about him. So he said, you know what, let's find a place. And he found a place that we were having meetings and whatnot. And so he found an auditorium. At the time, it was above a cab stand. It was called Page's Auditorium. And so what I remember about that, and I don't want to go off on a tangent, but what I remember about that is that there are pictures that show Brother Malcolm speaking, and the room is 2/3 full of Duke students who want to hear for themselves who this person is. And so just seeing that, and it just amazed me. I said, okay, but now the media portrays him as some person who is anti or who is against, or is a black supremacist, if you want to say that. But the media portrays him one way, but people are not fearful enough to not want to come and hear him. That resonated with me. And so I said, okay. So, but, you know, so I say all of that to say, because this is the environment that I grew up in. And so having those experiences creates in you the desire, and well, not just the desire, but it creates in you a mindset that conviction is very important. Whether it's by popular consent or not, your conviction will eventually win through, and especially if it's a universal value that transcends what's popular for that time. And so I learned that as I began to grow older, and I guess I'll use the word wiser as well. So I feel like my life was a very, very rich life. And so the experiences with these people from a movement that was not very popular is very impactful today, though, because when you look at it, you see that it has withstood the test of time, and some of the same things that we were dealing with 60 years ago are back full circle again. So we have not resolved fully some of the issues that we were dealing with. So I hope that answered your question.
Oh, no, it's an amazing story. And in it, I can hear the perceived threat of Brother Malcolm's ideas. They're present because you saw the audience yourself, right? These students came out regardless. So that's the volatility right there, the power of those ideas, and if they're communicated. And what I'm also hearing is that your community created an infrastructure. The ideas were going to be expressed regardless somewhere, if not at these institutions. So yeah, thank you. I think you also, did you mention Muhammad Ali?
Muhammad Ali, yeah. Okay. So this was 1963. 1967, 4 years later, I was 16, yeah. Okay. So 4 years later, Muhammad Ali came and stayed with us for about a week. And he had been, his title had been taken away from him because of his stance on the Vietnam War. And so just being up close and personal with him, he's a funny guy. He was a funny guy. But just being up close and personal with him as a young person, I also got to see resiliency and how to prepare yourself for the ups and downs in life, because you can be riding high one day and then brought back down literally in a matter of days or months or whatever. And so for me, as I reflect back on that time, I just, the resiliency, you on top of the world, and then this happens. And so I never forget, a reporter asked, well, why did Malcolm come and stay at you all's house? I said, well, he and my father were friends in the Muslim community, but my father was an older man, and so he wanted somebody that he could just be with, be himself, and not have to be other than who he was. And so seeing that up close and personal gave me an appreciation for how to handle life's challenges. He didn't make a light of it, but he was a person who was, he needed some space. He needed some air just to clear his head and just to think, how do I move now that this has happened to me? And so he and my father would have conversations. I don't remember all of them because, again, that's a long time ago. Mm-hmm. But they would stay up at night and just talk and try to make sense of what's happening and how do you move and how do you garner a sense of, still have a sense of dignity and purpose, even though this situation has befalled you. Mm-hmm. So it was a beautiful thing. And I am very grateful for those experiences as a young person and an adolescent. Mm-hmm. Again, for me, it created a sense of, you know what, if you have a value, if you have purpose, stay with that purpose. Be God conscious. Stay with that purpose. Trust in God to help you weather the storm, and you will be better as you go through it. After you come out of that situation, you will be a better person because it will have created either calluses or muscles or something mm-hmm. as a result of you having gone through that particular situation. Mm-hmm.
Are there any specific challenges that you recall your parents facing and how they went about resolving those challenges together or in their community?
Well, when you talk about economic empowerment, one of the biggest challenges is trying to garner the wherewithal to help motivate people who have not maybe the vision that you have. And so one of the things that I really saw in my parents, it was a strength as well as a challenge. They were people persons. Mm. So they got along with a lot of people, and not just within our own religious circle. Mm-hmm. I would come home sometime from school and business people would be in the house talking. Or I would come home and my father would be holding discussions with folk who possibly needed some encouragement. And so, it wasn't just, they were challenges, yes, but the way he approached challenges was to create a mindset that this is just for a time. If we can help folk have a vision, and everybody doesn't have it, but if we can help people see that without collected effort we will get through this, then that's half the battle in and of itself. Mm. And so that's what I saw, and they used they used their strength, their inner strength, their wit, their people skills to do things that or to overcome things. And it's just, and today people come up to me and say, your father did such and such for me. Your mom helped me do such and these are not people, again, who were a part of my religious community.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the humanitarian approach that they had to people, and because they were people, you know, that's just what they did. They believed in the goodness of people. And I saw that. And so I guess when I think about the challenges, the challenges are overshadowed by the results. That's how I see it. Yeah.
So it sounds like having a sense of solidarity
Mm-hmm.
with other struggles mattered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you have siblings?
I had two brothers. One is deceased, and I have another brother who lives out of state. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where does he live in?
Ohio. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about education a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you attend school, and what were your favorite subjects?
Mm-hmm. When we first moved here, here in the South, schools were segregated, and so I attended. My first experience was what they called a consolidated school. So I attended Washington School, and it was first grade through 12th grade. Mm. And so I attended that. Then I attended the newly built, first time black middle school, first class to go through Carnegie Middle School. And then my high school was Ligon High School, and I was the last class to graduate before integration. So I graduated in 1970. And then I went on to North Carolina Central and finished there in 1974. Did my master's work there. And then I worked on my doctorate at North Carolina State University.
Okay, so you're a double eagle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We'll get to the HBCU campus in a moment. Just thinking about social life, what you enjoyed doing with your friends as a young person in high school or during that time.
I was in a debate. I was on the debate team. I loved that. I was on the yearbook staff, helping to put the yearbook together. Did what most typical teenagers do, enjoyed it. I do have a friend now that we meet periodically. I thought we had met in high school. She said, Rhonda, listen, we've been knowing each other since elementary school. So it's just good to stay connected that way. I enjoy reading people's biographies. I love reading biographies. I also like traveling. I haven't been able to do much of that since COVID, but I enjoy travel. I think that it's an education in and of itself. And to connect with people. I enjoy connecting. When I was in college in the 1970s, apartheid was very much a part of our world order. And so that was on the minds of college students at that time, very much on the mind. So we would gather and we would talk about apartheid, and we would talk about, what can be done to dismantle it. So it wasn't just about partying and having a good time. It was really social consciousness as a college student, and really trying to discern how we could make a difference as college students. Mm-hmm.
And did you engage in protests on campus and off?
Not very much. I didn't engage in protests in the sense of marching, but I engaged in strategic discussions ways that we felt could help us to better understand and how it impacted our struggle here. So unlike people who go out and march, my approach was to how do we make a difference here? How do we create solidarity and offset spending our dollars where people show us that they devalue us? And so that was part of what I was a part of. Yeah.
On North Carolina Central's campus, did you get the sense that faculty and staff nurtured this political education that you and fellow students were engaged in? What's the relationship to the university and the work that y'all are doing, perhaps on your own time?
We had some awesome instructors.
Yeah, tell me about that.
We had, and I'm going to have to try to call on one that comes to mind. I read about him. One of my professors was in the book that not C. Eric Lincoln. It was John Hope Franklin. Was in the book Mirror to America. One of my professors was friends with John Hope Franklin. And so I felt, wow, I didn't know that at the time, but when I read it, I learned of his friendship and the fact that he had taught at North Carolina Central University and whatnot. And so, yes, there were nurturing professors and individuals who poured into us, not just college, but high school as well. I felt very confident that when we left, that we had what it took to go out here and make our way in the world and still hold on to our sense of purpose and identity. So yes, definitely. The student union was a gathering place at North Carolina Central for us to talk, discuss, and to have lively debates. Yeah. And so I remember that very, very, very much, yes.
How about homecoming?
Oh, definitely homecoming. Homecoming is like none other at a HBCU. Just the sense of family, the sense of pride in your school, all of that just culminated to a feeling of belonging. Yeah, definitely.
Did you pledge a sorority?
No, I did not. Mm-mm.
And I'm just curious now that we're talking about Central. How have you seen the campus and its life change over the years?
I was on campus a few months back in the spring, and I literally, when I walked on the campus, I cried. Because it has expanded, it has improved, the facilities are just beautiful. And it made me feel really good about the sustainability of the school. My daughter, one of my daughters went to North Carolina A&T 20 some years ago. And when I was on its campus, the week of its homecoming, I just had a sense, even though I did not attend, my daughter attended, but I just had a sense of just overwhelming pride and just a full feeling of seeing how our HBCUs, these two particular ones here in North Carolina Central University and North Carolina A&T, how they have served the needs, but also there is a community outreach that you can see and that you know is making an impactful difference in the community where they are. And that just feels really, it gives you a sense of pride, yeah.
I want to begin to shift this a little bit to radio, right, which is the focus of our project. WSHA, a radio station in Raleigh at Shaw University, founded in 1968. Are you aware of it at the time as a college student? Are you listening to radio?
No, I was not, because North Carolina Central had a radio station too.
What station was that?
I think it was WNCC. And the call letters, I don't know if they've changed or not. But, you know, as a college student, you up late at night studying, and so you're listening to the radio. But WSHA is Shaw University, period, is dear to my heart, because as a high school student, my mother enrolled me in speech camps here on the campus. And she took part in addition to having radio talk shows, she was actively involved in scholarship raising monies. And many community people felt for Shaw, and which is located here in what we call the Black Belt, Southeast Raleigh. And so she was a person who, Shaw had financial challenges and struggles, and she wanted the community, it's our time to help. Let's raise some money. So let's do the Lou Rawls telethon. Let's do the O.A. Dupree Scholarship Fund. And just, that was just her, and so for me, there's always been this connection. And so for Shaw Radio, when I think WLLE no longer, my mother was on WLLE, and when WLLE no longer was on the airways, someone approached her, and I'm not as coherent as I need to be, but someone approached her about coming on Shaw Radio, and when she did, it's like, wow, it was bringing the community into the campus. And so there was a closeness and an affinity for Shaw Radio, for Shaw University, that I know in our home that, you know, they were one and all the same. So.
And WLLE is at NC State?
No, that was the black radio station, WLLE.
Independent?
Independent, yes.
Okay, so we've kind of alluded to the fact that your mother was on the radio. Mm-hmm. She, Margaret Rose Murray. Mm-hmm. She's why we're here today, talking in large part. Mm-hmm. A significant voice, organizer, backer of WSHA radio. So let's really focus on her even more now. Tell me what got her interested in radio, and how did this start?
Well, she is a very civic and vocal person. And so her impetus was, her show was called Traces of Faces and Places. And the impetus for her radio show was to make the community aware of the contributions of black people. That was her whole thrust. And so when she began, this was the program format that she wanted to have. People need to know that there are people out here who look like us, who are meeting the challenge, who are doing things. And so she initially started out talking about African American history. And she would start the show, one of her mottos was, there is an art to living, and the foremost part is giving. And so for her, giving back, she grew up in an age and a time when in her schooling, children were taught their African American history. When she moved here to North Carolina, she was a substitute teacher, and she didn't see that in the schools. And so that became something that was a mission for her. People need to know, people have to know where they come from, and we didn't just originate from slavery, but who were the people who make a difference? Because when you look, her thing was, when you look at a picture, the first thing you look and see is Am I on that picture? You want to know, what did you contribute? Where am I in this whole scheme of things? And so she felt as if this was important for the community to know those who had gone before us and the contributions they made. Then it broadened to people who were in the community doing things. So she had segments on education. She had segments on health and wellness. She had psychiatrists coming on. She had the mayor who would come on once a month. I forget the mayor's name, but he had a monthly talk show, and he would talk about things that were going on in the city. And so it became, her show became a household name in the city, and that was the impetus for her to let people know what's going on. We have to be aware so we can be conscious of not only what's going on, but how we can play a role in it as well. So,
do you recall when the show first went on the air?
And I knew you were going to ask me that. I have been thinking, and if I'm not mistaken, it was in the 80s. If I'm not mistaken, I'll have to verify and check. One of the technicians who used to be on the show with her, who helped with the recordings, was not able to. I had called him. He was not able to attend because of some medical issues. But I'll have to verify. But I think it was in the 80s. So it was about.
Are you referring to Rashad Abdul-Muhammad?
Yes.
We've been fortunate to speak with him for this project.
Good.
He was our first WSHA interview.
Good.
And she continued until what year recently?
She continued until the station was bought about 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, I think it closed in 2018. Is that
something
right?
Before COVID?
Yeah.
So I think she was on the air probably until 2016, something like that.
Okay, and then towards the end of WSHA's life, did was it Cash
Michaels
take over the
Yes,
slot?
definitely. Cash Michaels.
Just want to make sure I get this chronology straight in my mind.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, if we can drill down in any more detail about the format of the show, or just what you remember, even more issues that she took an interest in and covered. I think, for example, in my research, did she cover, activism around the AIDS crisis in the 80s, I believe? Any other social issues like that you might recall?
One issue that I recall was, I'm trying to pull it together in my head. It's not quite clear, but I'm just trying to think. What were some of the issues in the 80s?
Take your time.
I know that there was a boycott on Crabtree Valley. There had been discussions, or there had been a ordinance because of black students coming to Crabtree Valley. It was said that they were disruptive and they could no longer come to Crabtree Valley. I don't remember the year. It might have been in the 90s or the late 80s. I can't remember. And so, Raleigh citizens were upset that, this was black teenagers being stigmatized about that. And so for a period of time, there was a boycott on shopping at Crabtree Valley Mall. And I don't remember all of the details, but I know that was a biggie in that time. And like I said, I'm not sure if that was in the 80s or the early 90s. I think it was I'm not sure, but I think it was toward the end of the 80s and perhaps the early 90s. And I'm just trying to think that there was some other, I can't pull anything up right now in my mind. I'll think on it some more.
That's okay. Mm-hmm. And she never stopped educating herself, right? She continued on to get a few additional degrees. She
obtained her FCC license so that she could be better prepared to be a radio personality, to deliver. She was a lifelong learner. That was just her. That was her MO. She believed in understanding and I want to say bringing about information that was impactful to people and to the citizenry. And so her efforts, I know later, were to her efforts were. She made the comment one time that African American history is American history. It's not just for African Americans; it's for everybody, and for us to appreciate. So she was really about the business of making sure that we appreciated, and our counterparts, our Caucasian brothers, everybody and sisters understood the impact of what we did. So she was always learning. She traveled. She took groups to Africa 4 or 5 times. She made excursions there. And because I don't want it to seem as if she just was educated book-wise. Mm-hmm. She was a believer in experiential learning as well as knowledge that we obtain from sources. And so, and that's, I think, and then she always, it's amazing, she always was able to connect with the common person. She and my father had a favorite poem, and that was If by Rudyard Kipling. And the reason that they liked it, because one of the first, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. And it goes on and on and on. But they wanted people to have this sense of, yes, things will get difficult. Yes, there will be challenges. But if we can draw on this inner strength that we have, this internal fortitude that we as a people, it was developed from the time we were brought from our homeland here. There's still something innate in us that causes us to be resilient and to have the fortitude to do. That was her whole business about being educated, to be able to share, with others and give impetus and strength to individuals so that they could pull together things in their own personal life and in their collective life. Yeah.
She had a praxis.
Mm-hmm.
She had a real philosophy
Mm-hmm.
to what mattered in education, how to practice it. What can you tell me about her work with the Womanhood Development Program at the NC Correctional Institution for Women?
Wow. This lady was something else. She worked at the Women's Correctional Institute for a number of years, maybe 20 to 25 years. And her goal was to reduce the recidivism, to keep women from having to come back. And so part of her work and her mission and her drive was that these are women, and if they come in one way, they should not go out the same way they came in. And so she held personal development classes that helped these young women. Many of them were in prison because of some things that they did, but because for some of them they took raps for their significant others. And so her goal was to help these women when they are released, they have a sense of being changed, being enhanced, being enriched, and not going back to that same environment. One of the things that she wanted to do desperately, that she did not get to fully achieve, was to have a halfway house. The same way they have for men, but to have one for women, that they could be released to this halfway house, and in turn, it would give them a chance to get themselves together and make that, transition from incarceration back to being accepted back in the community, but not just accepted, but have a purpose and a goal for what they were going to come out and do. Some of the women, I remember one particular woman, I don't remember her name, but she was very close to my mother, and she tried to establish and set up a place of residence for women because she had been incarcerated, and her goal, she studied real estate, and so her goal was to purchase some property. And I think my mother went to the grand opening, and I did not go, but went to this grand opening of this residential place that she was trying to start. So her, again, it was to help these women and keep them from having to keep coming back. Because many of them, when they went back to their homes or to their environments that they left, and they started getting back into the same things. And so it had even gotten to a point, I know one evening she came home frustrated. She said, now, this girl just left out of here a year ago and she's back. And so, her take on all of that is that we've got to do something to help these young women become more than what they are when they come in here, so they leave here with some kind of skills. If there's some education classes or some education that they can take to get their GED, or some type of skills that they can learn, then that was her whole push, is to get them toward that and hopefully come out a little, not just a little, but better than what they went in.
Yeah, I mean, hearing you talk, I can't help but connect that to the important prisoner rights activism that Muslims, that Black Muslims, that the NOI had been doing in the mid 20th century and even earlier. In advocacy of prisoners' rights, thinking about, Malcolm X's journey as an example, but the repression that came with that from the state. What I'm curious about is, like, I don't hear enough about incarcerated women, like the folks that your mother was working with in the history books that I'm reading as a historian. Did she make a connection between that work that her faith community did within prisons?
That's a good question. Probably so, but because she has always been for the underdog and the downtrodden. I mean, that's who she is. Even outside of her prison involvement in ministry or whatever, people would call, and because of her advocacy, people would call the house and say, Miss Murray, my son just died and we don't have enough money to bury him. Can you help us? So she established the fund. I mean, that's who she was as a person. And so it could have been her faith, but I also know that she saw people as human beings who needed a second chance, who needed an opportunity. If you give me an opportunity, I can make more of myself. And so that was what I understood about her. That's what I understood about her. And It's who she was, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Another social issue that I read that she was passionate about was pushing for the establishment of a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, a national holiday. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me anything about that effort?
Now, my mother had so many efforts.
Yeah.
And I can't personally tell you about that because during that time I was a young mother myself, raising children, and so I wasn't right up on all of her initiatives at that time. But again, you know, being able to recognize and celebrate, and I don't mean celebrate from the traditional sense of celebrate, but to recognize the efforts of people who are out here struggling and who are trying to create a pathway that lifts everybody up. That's what she did. Mm-hmm. And I don't know as much as I probably could have, and there may be others who worked alongside her who could give more information on that. Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that next. What were some of the relationships among families who worked at WSHA as a radio station that were cultivated?
Well, you called a few people out. Cash Michaels was her co-program person. Dr. Paul Bidding, God rest his soul, was an educator who also came on and talked about education. Dr. Leroy Darks, and I can't remember the psychologist who came on with Dr. Darks, but Dr. Emeka early on, who helped with the programming of the station, they all became that radio family. And you know, what I do know is that they would bounce ideas off on each other, and you know, when there were issues and topics that she felt their expertise could lend information to the community, she would have them to come on. She would have a discussion. Let's do a series of this, or let's run this for a period of time. Or if she were traveling out of the country, then they would be the co-host while she was away. So it was like a family, and she was sort of the matriarch of the family, but they formed a bond, and it was a beautiful thing. It really, really was. The Dillahunts, they're just people who were out here who were doing very similar work, very important work, that they all just connected. And it was a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Yeah, if we're thinking about the synergies there, like when Ajamu Dillahunt and others are focused on the work that Black Workers for Justice are doing, you know, organizing retail workers and women and, you know, Black folk in all sorts of industries in Carolina, you know, is she on the radio talking about those issues and telling stories about these struggles? Definitely.
I don't remember the shows per se, but I know that there were discussions, and she would have people to come on and and talk about these particular things, these issues, and why they were important to us. I'm trying to pull up some other names as we're talking, but that was her calling to the community. Hey, we need to know about this. We need to know that there is a situation that's going on. Workers are not getting the same pay as their counterparts or whatever, and we need to speak our voice to this. And so she would have those kinds of discussions on the radio, and people able to call in and offer their perspective. So Yes, definitely. I'm still trying to bring up some other names of people that I remember who worked with her and who were working in their own right, not just with her, but in their own right, moving and paving a way and making a difference as well. I'm trying to think. I can't pull anybody else's name up right now. At this point, I can't pull anybody else's name up. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. What sense did you have about what your father felt about the work that your mother was doing on radio? How did they support one another?
Well, I tell you, they were power couples. My father was working in juxtaposition of her, okay? So meaning that he was about the business of, she was on the radio, and he was about the business of building economic stability in the black community. So he was advancing structures or causes that had to do with economic development. And so, and I remember this as a young person. And so they were traveling to them. They considered themselves partners because he was not a radio personality, but he could galvanize people. He was a people person. And so he was about the business of, like I said, establishing and helping to create an economic platform that regular people in the community could be a part of and help and bring themselves up along, whether it was restoring. My father had a skill in refurbishing places, and so he would offer employment and employment for men who had that skill or who wanted to learn it. He was also an advocate of vocational training. He grew up in an era where there was what they call apprenticeship or journeyman, when young people could learn by being in the presence of others. And so that was something that he was advocating and promoting at the same time.
There's a question I'm formulating in my mind as I hear this, because I'm thinking about today, and I'm thinking about what's law when we lose individuals like your parents. How could the black community, how could the entire community, Raleigh, the local community, what are we losing when we lose folks like your parents who are this galvanizing force? You know
what? I sat in on you all symposium yesterday. And I literally said to myself when I left, my parents would be happy to see this. So I don't think we've lost. We have gained. Sometimes when you're out there working and doing, you feel like you're the only one and you don't know the impact. But when I listened and I heard the young people coming up in this whole, just in the preservation, but when I saw it and heard it, I said, oh, my goodness, my mother and father would be so pleased to see this and to hear this, because the work is still going on. And there are young people all over this country and maybe in other parts of the world who have stories that are very similar to what I'm telling about my parents. So then it's not in isolation. And I just feel as if this is telling, it's impactful, and we haven't lost. I have to reframe it because I felt good yesterday when I left out of the symposium.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I really did.
That means we're doing our jobs.
Yeah, I really did.
That may be a legacy. Are there other legacies that you see your mother having left or your parents having left in the community?
Well, one of the things that I know, this whole notion of doing for the collective whole is, to me, a legacy. I see people who are trying to, in their own right, in their own efforts, trying to work for long term. And that's what they were working for. Because as they got older, they would say, I may not see, same thing as Dr. Martin Luther King, I may not see this world that we're trying to create, but to begin to put things in place, to begin to talk to young people and help them envision, help them know that they are part of this larger order of greatness. That's the word I'm thinking about right now. But to know that, yes, you have something that you can contribute. And if you keep walking down this path, others are going to join you. You're not going to be in isolation. And so the legacy that I see, and I'm a septarian, but what I see is there is this growing movement of young people. I listen to urban radio. I listen to HBCU radio. And there is this, the narrative has changed. There is this boldness and this this whole notion that we can control our destiny. That's what I'm hearing. We have work to do. We're standing on the shoulders of our ancestors. And I'm not talking about just our ancestors from Africa. We're standing on the shoulders of our aunts and uncles. I have relatives who made sacrifices, who sent their little money to help me go to school. We're standing on those shoulders of people who knew that they couldn't do it, but they saw you as the conduit to bring things forward. And my story is just one of millions, really and truly. And so what I'm hoping the legacy is, as I saw yesterday, that these young people are listening to their grandparents. They are listening to their aunts and uncles. My husband's parents were sharecroppers.
Would you tell me a little bit about your husband's story? Yeah.
It's just amazing. His parents grew up in the rural part of Durham County. And they were his grandfather, his uncles, they were all sharecroppers. And I had never really appreciated the term until I heard my husband talk about going out to pick tobacco tobacco, that's my ebonics, but going out to pick tobacco when he was youngster, and, they having to take collectively the bags that they had, and they would get some of the value of it, but it mostly went to the owner of the farm or whatever. And that was the tenor of the times. And so that was in his period of growth and development. That was in the 1900s, the 1950s. And so I said, wow, people were still sharecropping all. And he said, yes. And so I say all of that to say that when we think about where we have come and the stories that many of our family members can tell, this effort that you all are doing is worth its weight, because when people hear and know that somebody who comes from that early beginning or from that station in life can rise up and make and do some things, I can too. Mm. And so that's just it's amazing. And so I do believe in education. I do. I believe education is transformative. In the sense that education, formal education as well as experiential education put together help to make a full, well-rounded person. Our HBCUs have a tremendous role to play in our education. When I was coming along, we did not have choices. We had to go to an HBCU. But to see them flourish and grow and develop and be able to be all that they can be now, you have our white counterparts coming to these HBCUs. And so I was on A&T's campus a month ago, and I saw little robots walking the campus, and they were making deliveries. It blew my mind. I said, oh, my goodness. Robots making deliveries to buildings. They're programmed to take packages or things to students or to buildings across campus. They know when to stop. They've been programmed how to cross streets and just all of that. And so to be able to keep up with the technological advances and still serve the needs of our young people, it's tremendous. So we are indebted to our HBCUs. We are indebted to them. Well,
thank you. You answered my question of how HBCUs have changed over time. But, if you could define in your own words what HBCU radio means to you.
Wow. To me, a historically black college and university radio station or radio is the voice into darkness.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm. It is. It can reach places that perhaps cannot be reached. It is a beacon that serves to enlighten the young people who are there, but also the broader community. And that's what, to me, HBCU has done. Radio, talk radio, and radio has done. WSHA used to have a segment that they just played classical jazz. And my father would love it because he grew up in that age where classical jazz, you have contemporary jazz now, but they played John Coltrane and Miles Davis and just different people. And so, it reaches all generations. And those are areas that maybe a newspaper can't reach. But it's so rich and enlightening that we have to preserve the ones that are left remaining. We really have to help them.
Yeah, can we, speaking to the urgency of that mission, what do you want to tell the world about WSHA? Even if you want to speak to sort of efforts to save the station or just what it meant to people in even more detail.
Well, just in my little short history with WSHA, and my history has been maybe 30, 35 years. There have been economic challenges that caused the station to need funding. Mm-hmm. And so people in the community, maybe not as much as they need it, but people in the community, because of what WSHA put out there, people in the community were able to bring their little collective efforts and offer some assistance. But the fact that this radio station was a voice, it was very hurtful for it to be sold. My mother was still living when that happened, and it hurt her deeply. And so what I want to say about WSHA is I don't know as much as I need to know about radio today. I know that there are different facets of radio communication, but it would be, I just wonder, is there another way for it to revive it and bring it back on another platform or another format or whatever, because it has tremendous significance. And it's worth investigating. Now, so if there are people out there who know more than what we know here today, it would be worth that. That's what I'd like to say.
It would be well received.
Yeah, yeah.
So you've kind of, I'm moving us towards the end here, but and you've sort of touched on it, but any more you can say about how you feel about the HBCU Radio Preservation Project and why this work matters?
Well, I'm just learning about it, and I deliberately came to the symposium yesterday because I want to know what I'm walking into. And so when I sat there and I heard and just took in as a listener trying to understand and get the meat of what this initiative is, it made me feel, again, like I said, my parents would be proud of this. And so the preservation, bringing in students, that's big for me. Bringing in students to learn, who have learned or who are experiencing mass communication and how to digitize, that's crucial. For many HBCUs and many schools, that knowledge may not be readily at hand. And so you all are intentional. You've done your homework, you know where to go, and you're intentionally going in offering this as a means to preserve. I would love to see, the same way they have the Joe Madison classics, I would love to see Shaw Radio, some of those very potent shows that were on, go out and be put out there as classics for Shaw Radio. That's just a thought and an idea. But at any rate, preserving and saving this legacy for other young people to hear. I'm hopeful that in the preservation of this, not just the storing and the housing, but there will be things that will be taken out of this here at Shaw or other places that students can hear and learn from some of those wonderful shows that were recorded and broadcasted.
Well, I'm happy to report in the initial preservation work that our archival team was doing yesterday at the library, I saw many media copies of Traces of Faces and Places. So that will be preserved and it will be brought back to the university, made available online in various forms, but given back to the institution that created it as best we can.
Good.
So that's exciting.
Good.
A closing question, what gives your life meaning today?
I'm a retired educator. And so I get enthusiastic, I get inspired when I see young people carrying the torch. I do. I get inspired. It just does something for me. And when they can articulate their aspirations, and in part of that articulation is that they want to preserve or they want to take that baton and move and do something that is beneficial and impactful for the good of black people and all people, because ultimately when you do it for the good of black folk, you're doing it for the good of others as well, because we are people who are very much in tune with our humanity. And so it just makes me, it gives me a really strong sense of, if my eyes were to close tomorrow, this work is still going to go on. And it makes me feel good about that. Yeah, it does. It really does. So when I see young people have their heads together, they're on a mission, they're moving and shaking, they're talking, they're influencing others, that is inspiring. That makes me feel really, really good. It does.
You know, you said you like biographies earlier. If we were writing the biography of your mother based on this interview and some of the discussions we've had, what might be missing from our conversation today that we've left out? Is there anything you want to get on record about your life, her life, your father's life, this community?
Wow. I don't know if there's too much that's missing, and I have to pull myself together because the part that I think is missing is that they both came from humble beginnings. Very humble beginnings. And they did not allow that to define who they were or who they were going to be. And so as I look at my trajectory as a person, I was instructed when I got my education to make sure you use it for the benefit of others. And so as we move forward, and as I think about them and the work that they did and the work that we collectively, because it's really not about me, it's about how we impact others and how people can take away from what you have done and make a definitive decision to go forth and stand on faith and the legacy of those who came before them, whether it's your mother, your grandmother, your aunt, your uncle, whomever. But to go forth and know that we have a tremendous legacy that we stand on, and we only enhance that legacy each time we add to that legacy our own individual selves.
That's well said. Well, we can leave it there on that very poignant note. Dr. Rhonda Muhammad, it was my pleasure to interview for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. We appreciate your story. This is an important contribution to this project. Margaret Rose Murray's legacy lives on in this work. So, I just want to thank you personally.
Thank you. This was it was a humbling and honor for me to do it, especially while my faculties are still together. So, but I feel endeared to Shaw University and and to all the HBCUs who have made an indelible mark on the young people who have matriculated through those schools. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.